A young girl of 16 rode her bicycle home and mysteriously disappeared. The next day, her lifeless body was found in a field near the road. The unknown criminal had taken her life and fled the scene. Despite having a DNA sample of the culprit, the authorities struggled to track him down until 13 years later. This documentary will explore the tragic tale of Marianne Vaatstra and shed light on why this murder continues to be a notorious chapter in Dutch history. Marianne Vaatstra was born in the Netherlands on August 10, 1982. She resided in De Westereen, a small village in the northern part of the country, far from major cities. The youngest of 6 siblings, Marianne had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. As her older siblings gradually moved away to other cities and countries, she remained with her parents and 1 older brother. Marianne attended the local school, enjoyed music, and had a wide circle of friends. The region she lived in was characterized by small towns and settlements scattered a few kilometers apart. Consequently, Marianne frequently visited neighboring areas to socialize with friends or shop. In her spare time, she worked part-time at the local supermarket. On April 30th, 1999, the nation celebrated Queen's Day. After finishing her shift, Marianne went to Colum, a nearby town, to spend the evening with friends at a local cafe. Later, her boyfriend and his friends joined the group, and they all decided to cycle to Boijel Post, a settlement 6 kilometers away. Marianne borrowed a bicycle since she didn't have one of her own. When they decided to head back, she set off towards her hometown, which was approximately 11 kilometers away. Unfortunately, she never arrived. Initially, her parents assumed she had stayed over at a friend's place in Colum, but this assumption was soon dispelled. Marianne had promised to return home that evening, and if she had planned to stay elsewhere, she would have informed her family. Concerned, Marianne's father contacted her best friend, Afi, only to learn that Marianne had bid her farewell that night and left for home. It became evident to everyone that something untoward might have befallen Marianne. Her friend contacted her boyfriend and brought her sister along, driving together along the route Marianne usually took home. Meanwhile, the young woman's father made the decision to immediately inform the police. He informed them that his daughter had not returned home, and none of her friends had any information on her whereabouts. Shortly after, 2 officers arrived to file a missing persons report, then headed back to the station to initiate the search. Meanwhile, Afi, her sister, and boyfriend were driving close to the settlement of Fenkeliester, surrounded by vast fields. They spotted something shiny in the grass and stopped to investigate. As they approached, they discovered a bicycle lying in the grass. A short distance away, approximately 15 meters, they found Marianne's lifeless body. She was unclothed, with a cut on her neck. The trio was deeply shocked. Afi attempted to check Marianne's pulse, but couldn't bring herself to get closer to the body. It was evident that the young woman had passed away, but her best friend was in disbelief due to the overwhelming shock. She struggled to dial the police on her phone. Multiple officers arrived promptly, with 2 officers heading to Marianne's family home. At that point, the victim's identity had not been officially confirmed, so the officers picked up her father and took him to the scene. Forensic experts were already present, and the father sadly recognized Marianne immediately. Upon examining the area, the detectives noticed a crucial detail. There were 2 bicycle tracks leading from the road to where the young woman's body was found, and only 1 track going in the opposite direction. This indicated that the perpetrator was also on a bicycle. The police scoured the vicinity for evidence, even utilizing aerial photography, but the only item discovered near the crime scene was a lighter. Marianne's friend confirmed that she neither smoked nor owned a lighter, prompting the police to send it to the lab for analysis. The medical examiners concluded that the young woman had suffered abuse and discovered traces of semen, which allowed them to create a DNA sample of the killer. This same DNA was detected on the lighter. Despite uploading it to the police database, no matches were found, indicating that the perpetrator had no prior criminal history. Shortly after the body was discovered, Marianne's boyfriend, Spencer, was singled out as a suspect by the local police department head, even though there was no evidence against him. However, the young man willingly provided his DNA sample, which did not match the one found on the victim. The crime received extensive coverage in the local media and on television, as such incidents were rare in the peaceful area, prompting public pressure on the police to apprehend the culprit swiftly. Despite having the killer's DNA sample within the first week, the detectives were at a standstill with no suspects. Numerous calls from local residents suggested potential suspects, but none of these theories were confirmed. The majority of people pointed towards a specific location near where Marianne's body was discovered, a migration center for asylum seekers, mainly from Iran and Syria. This theory gained traction in the local towns, leading many to believe that a refugee was responsible for the murder. Consequently, the police had to explore this lead. Marianne's funeral on May 5th drew around 1,500 people, with many coming from neighboring communities to support her family. 2 days later, her parents organized a memorial procession, concluding with an address to the public. Approximately 20,000 individuals participated in the event, largely due to the extensive national media coverage of the case. The police received an increasing number of contacts each day, and eventually, the detectives received a promising lead. Multiple individuals reported seeing Marianne at a cafe one evening, where she was approached by a man of Oriental appearance who attempted to engage her in conversation. When the young woman declined, the man made a threatening gesture towards her by running his thumb along his throat. Given that the young woman was killed in a similar manner, the police immediately launched a search for the young man. It was later discovered that he was a 15-year-old refugee from the same migration center. Although he admitted to making the gesture, he denied any involvement in the murder. Despite providing a DNA sample that did not match the one found on the victim's body, local residents continued to blame the refugees from the migration center. This led to the organization having to hire additional security guards to prevent potential conflicts. 12 days after the murder, people gathered at the migration center to protest. Initially, they demanded the release of the murderer, but the situation escalated by evening. Some individuals even threw Molotov cocktails towards the building, prompting police intervention. Since then, security at the center has been significantly increased, and there have been no further demonstrations of this nature. A few days later, the police announced the arrest of a 32-year-old man who resided in the same town as Marianne. He was known as a local alcoholic and was generally disliked by most residents. The arrest was made after a witness came forward, claiming to have seen the man in bloody clothes on the night of the murder. However, the man's DNA did not match the sample, and the witness admitted to fabricating the entire story out of personal animosity towards the man. Upon discovering a potential link to the immigration center, law enforcement officials initiated an examination of the logbook documenting the movements of refugees from the asylum area. While refugees had the right to depart from the center, they were required to log their destination and purpose. It was revealed that 2 refugees, a 26-year-old and a 19-year-old, had left the center on the night of the murder without specifying their whereabouts. Authorities began investigating their potential involvement, but withheld specific details for an extended period. The victim's father expressed dissatisfaction with the lack of information provided by investigators and the failure to apprehend the perpetrator. Subsequently, he sought the assistance of a renowned crime journalist to shed light on the case. On July 1st, the victim's father appeared on a popular television show to disclose the journalist's findings. It was revealed that the 2 refugees who left the center on the night of the murder were seen at the same cafe as the victim and departed shortly after she left with her friends. Furthermore, their whereabouts remained unknown since that night, as they did not return to the center and could not be located by the authorities. Despite having photographs of the suspects, the police had not released them for unknown reasons. Following the public disclosure of these details on television, law enforcement announced that they were collaborating with Interpol to locate the suspects, with the prevailing belief being that they may have fled the country. These developments reignited tensions between local residents and refugees, leading to protests outside the center in early October. On October 9th, Turkish authorities reported the arrest of one of the suspects who had been residing in Istanbul all along. He was extradited to the Netherlands, where a DNA sample was obtained and necessary tests were conducted. The sample found on the victim's body did not match the man, leading to his exoneration. The investigation hit a dead end once again, and suspicions turned back to her boyfriend, despite his DNA not being a match. Spencer's behavior raised eyebrows. Marianne's acquaintances and family were convinced she would never ride her bike home at night due to her fear of the dark, and the distance was considerable. It was common knowledge that Spencer should have driven her home, even according to Marianne's parents. Instead, he allowed her to ride her bike alone. Spencer was interrogated multiple times, and something peculiar began to emerge. He changed his story about that evening several times. Initially, Spencer claimed he met Marianne at a cafe, and they drove to the Buitenpost. However, he later stated that she had gone there with friends before he even arrived at the cafe. He then claimed he went to her on his bicycle. He also mentioned seeing two men walking with a bicycle on the way there, initially saying he didn't recognize them due to the darkness, but later claiming they were his friends. Despite the oddities, the police lacked evidence against Spencer, and his DNA did not match the killer's sample. The case remained at a standstill for several more months. On December 20th, the authorities sought the public's help and requested DNA samples from all men in the area. However, they encountered a setback. It was discovered that the law prohibited the mass collection of DNA from citizens, even with their consent. The police were limited to taking only 150 samples, none of which yielded a match. From that point on, the case essentially ground to a halt for several years. Marianne's parents attempted to advocate for a change in the law to allow extensive DNA screening, but their efforts were rebuffed. The decision was made to safeguard individuals' privacy, despite the fact that similar measures had resulted in the apprehension of the culprit multiple times in other nations. In July 2001, law enforcement officials released a rough description of the suspect, believing that the perpetrator was a local man aged between 20 and 40. Despite repeated requests, authorities were denied permission to carry out a large-scale DNA collection within a 5-kilometer radius of the crime scene, leading to a standstill in the case. The victim's parents continued to appear on television and grant interviews, but the case gradually lost public interest each year due to the lack of new evidence. In 2010, a specialized team utilized cutting-edge computer technology to create a detailed 3D model of the crime scene and all available evidence, reigniting public interest in the case. This prompted Marianne's parents to once again advocate for DNA screening. After 11 years, authorities finally considered amending the law, a process that took nearly 2 years and was completed on September 6, 2012. A press conference was held by the police, urging all men aged between 20 and 40 in 1999 to provide their DNA samples, with a collection area limited to 5 kilometers. Approximately 8,000 men were estimated to be involved, but not all of them consented to provide their DNA. The police managed to collect just over 6,500 samples, which were then studied by experts. Due to limited resources, the lab could only process about 400 samples per week, resulting in a study period of up to 4 months. The experts did not solely seek a complete match with the perpetrator's DNA profile, as it was unlikely that the culprit would willingly provide his DNA to the authorities. The laboratory was also working on identifying similarities to establish kinship and trace back to the killer through a father, brother, or other relative. On November 19th, a month after the testing began, experts finally found a long-awaited match. Surprisingly, they not only discovered a familial connection, but also obtained the DNA of the killer himself, indicating that he willingly provided it to the authorities. Detectives subsequently announced the apprehension of 45-year-old Jasper Steringa, a local farmer and father of 2, whose residence was just a few kilometers away from where Marianne was murdered. Initially, Jasper remained silent, but after consulting with his attorney, he opted to confess. However, the public only learned the specifics of this heinous crime on March 28, 2013, when the trial commenced. According to Jasper, on that fateful evening, he was completing tasks on his farm and decided to take a bicycle ride before retiring for the night. He admitted that riding his bicycle was often a pretext for his actual intentions, which involved seeking the company of local women in a neighboring village. Although his wife was unaware of his actions, he claimed in court that he had not intended to visit that night and had simply planned a ride to distract himself from family issues and farm challenges. Spotting Marianne alone on a desolate, dimly lit road, he seized the opportunity to act on his impulses. Jasper approached her, brandished a penknife, and threatened her into silence before leading her to a field where he committed unspeakable acts and ended her life. During the trial, he maintained that he had not intended to kill the young woman and had acted out of panic. Realizing the gravity of his actions and the repercussions for his family, particularly his young children aged 5 and 8 at the time, Jasper contemplated fleeing and taking Marianne's life to conceal his crime. However, guilt plagued him incessantly. He chose to remain in the vicinity, overhearing discussions about the crime and witnessing the impact on the family of the person he had harmed. Their lives were forever altered due to his atrocious actions. Despite contemplating surrendering to the authorities multiple times, he never reached a final decision. When a large-scale DNA testing initiative was introduced in 2012, Jasper understood that he would eventually be identified. With numerous relatives residing nearby, it was inevitable that one of them would provide his DNA. A partial match would be discovered by experts, prompting an investigation into all his family members, ultimately leading to his apprehension. Consequently, Jasper opted to submit his DNA, yet he struggled to muster the courage to visit the police station and admit his guilt. Following a brief trial, the judge delivered his verdict on April 19th, sentencing him to 18 years in prison out of a potential 20-year term as per Dutch law. After 13 years, Marianne's family finally witnessed the perpetrator facing consequences, although the legal system delivered an unwelcome surprise. Due to his exemplary conduct, Jasper is set to be released as early as 2024, having served less than a decade behind bars.
Christina Renee King earned the nickname Cricket from her family due to her petite stature. She was born in 1972 and resided in Kansas City, Kansas. Christina was married to Christopher Wayne Goodall, a professional roofer, and their relationship was filled with love and affection. In 1988, they joyfully welcomed their first child, April, into the world. 3 years later, their family grew with the arrival of their second daughter, Ashley. Unfortunately, Christopher's occupation couldn't adequately support their family, prompting Christina to seek alternative means of providing for them. Sources indicate that she began soliciting clients for financial assistance in an area known as Central Street, offering escort services. Tragically, Christopher found himself incarcerated at some point, leaving Christina feeling hopeless. Despite the societal label she carried, those who knew her believed she was genuinely a good-hearted individual. However, circumstances forced her into a life on the streets, where she faced the harsh realities of a world that often failed to recognize the humanity behind such labels. Christina experienced a brief period of incarceration, but her recent release from prison marked a somber chapter in her life. Unfortunately, the day after her release would be her last. In 1998, April, who was in 5th grade and celebrating her 10th Christmas, received devastating news. On Christmas morning, a group of boys scavenging for scrap metal in the driveway of an abandoned nursing home made a horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon a partially unclothed body, bearing signs of severe beatings and abandonment. The victim had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, with her pants partially pulled down. Nearby, her bra, shoes, and personal belongings were scattered. The victim's face had been brutally disfigured, leaving a gruesome scene. The Kansas City Police Department notified Christina's family, forever altering their lives. The victim was identified as 26-year-old Christina King, and the investigation into her tragic demise and the identity of her assailant began. Penny Barnett, the mother of Christina, consistently followed up with the KCPD in her quest for information. However, unbeknownst to Barnett, the police had actually obtained a lead. A used condom discovered at the crime scene alongside Christina's lifeless body. Unfortunately, there was a significant amount of negligence and incompetence on the part of the police, but I will delve into that later. On one occasion, during a phone call, Detective Terry Mast treated Penny Barnett so harshly that she ended up hanging up in tears. When her husband inquired about the reason behind her distress, she revealed that Detective Mast had been insensitive and had used inappropriate language when referring to Christina. The police displayed a clear bias against Christina, as they repeatedly informed the family that she was merely a streetwalker and therefore not a priority. This prejudiced attitude was evident at various points. April, later in life, had the opportunity to view the autopsy photos of her mother and was appalled by the numerous injuries, abrasions and bruises that covered her body. In 2010, Christopher Goodall passed away, leaving the two girls orphaned. However, even before this tragedy, their family had already been fractured by Christina's untimely death. For 5 years, Ashley and April had been fending for themselves, with Ashley, at just 14 years old, scouring Quindaro in search of the person responsible for her mother's murder. Quindaro, once a thriving settlement, had become an abandoned ghost town and was considered unsafe during the 90s. Ashley found herself in perilous situations, desperately seeking closure. Eventually, she got into a truck with someone she believed had a connection to her mother's killer. This individual was supposedly a suspect because Christina King's cousin and 2 other women had stolen a significant quantity of his illicit substances. However, this was merely a rumor circulating on the streets. Fortunately, he turned out not to be the person Ashley was seeking, and he did not cause her any harm. 2 decades passed without any further progress in the case. Then in December 2021, the family gathered at the intersection of North 27th Street and Sewell Avenue for a prayer vigil and balloon release. The vigil had been organized by Justice for Wyandotte, an advocacy group committed to promoting transparency in law enforcement. The group extended their support to Christina King's investigation, as they aimed to assist the loved ones of those who had been mistreated by the legal system. Khadija Hardway, a member of Justice for Wyandotte, took charge of coordinating the entire event. During her address to the attendees, she emphasized the significance of cases like Christina's, highlighting the urgent need for the Kansas Police Department to establish a cold case unit. Hardway urged the new police chief to allocate existing funds towards the establishment of this unit, as she believed it would enhance transparency in addressing both cold cases and ongoing investigations. This plea sparked a transformative response within the KCPD, ultimately leading to a breakthrough in Christina's case. The newly appointed police chief, Carl Oakman, took Hardway's request seriously and wasted no time in fulfilling it. Immediately after being sworn in on January 1, 2021, he made a solemn commitment to establish a cold case unit within the force. True to his word, a year later, in January 2022, Kansas City's first cold case unit became operational, employing 3 dedicated full-time detectives. This unit would play a crucial role in solving long-standing cold cases. Understanding the origins of Justice for Wyandotte is essential. It all began with Pearl Davis, a 43-year-old mother. Born in 1953, Pearl Barnes was Khadija Hardway's cousin and a devoted mother to their 2 young children. Pearl, also known as Semima Musawir, was an active member of the Kansas City Islamic community. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, offering her services as a skilled seamstress and running a transportation business that catered to the Chillicothe Correctional Facility. Additionally, she worked as an SRS driver, operated a daycare, sold dinners and bean pies, and actively participated in her family's lives, juggling a diverse range of responsibilities. Given her extensive involvement in the community, a sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed by anyone. Regrettably, Pearl's lifeless body was discovered on November 22, 1996, in an unoccupied residence on Lafayette Avenue in Kansas City. The property had previously belonged to her deceased mother. The autopsy conducted on Pearl revealed a horrifying truth. She had been brutally stabbed more than 40 times, her clothing forcibly removed and scattered nearby. The responsibility of investigating this case fell upon Detective Roger Golubski of the Kansas Police Department. However, Detective Golubski faced allegations of misconduct, as he had abused his position of authority on multiple occasions. From 1983 to 2008, the Kansas Police Department failed to properly investigate a series of similar cases involving women, most of whom were working women of similar ages. These women often found themselves grappling with homelessness, substance addiction, or engaged in escort services. Their tragic fates were marked by brutal methods such as strangulation, asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing. Their lifeless bodies were heartlessly abandoned in remote locations or isolated structures. Disturbingly, all of these women were discovered either partially or completely unclothed, with their pants pulled down or shirts pulled off. The victim's clothing was typically found in close proximity. Christina King, too, endured these terrifying circumstances. As time passed and the cases grew cold, it became increasingly evident that something was amiss with Golubski. Despite his familiarity with most, if not all, of the women who had been mercilessly slain, none of the case files indicated his knowledge of these individuals. Furthermore, despite the abundance of potential physical evidence that could have been analyzed, these particular cases received insufficient attention from forensic experts. As a result, evidence collection was often limited, and efforts to identify potential perpetrators through DNA or other forensic means were inadequate. The level of incompetence displayed was truly astounding. In fact, in Christina King's case, the Kansas Police Department received a DNA match with a potential suspect, but failed to conduct a follow-up investigation. Khadija Hardway, moved by the prolonged neglect of Golubski's victims' pleas for justice, found inspiration to collaborate with the community in organizing rallies and demonstrations. The objective was to ensure that the unsolved cases, the faces of the affected women, and their stories would not fade into oblivion. Motivated by Pearl's case, she joined forces with like-minded women to establish a non-profit called Justice for Wyandotte in 2020. The organization worked diligently to combat the department's corrupt individuals. Officers were observed using excessive force, bullying, intimidating, fabricating evidence, wrongfully arresting individuals, and coercing false testimonies to avoid false accusations and imprisonment. Thanks to Justice for Wyandotte shedding light on the crimes, they exposed the systematic corruption. They brought attention to the case of Lamont McIntyre, who was falsely accused and imprisoned for 23 years for a crime he did not commit. Despite being exonerated in 2017, he never received justice. Golubski remained free. However, there were still many unresolved issues regarding Golubski, particularly in victimizing women. During her involvement with the organization, Hardway arranged a meeting with Carl Oakman, a former candidate for chief of police. In this meeting, she highlighted the evident and unacceptable apathy surrounding unsolved cold cases in the community, stressing the enduring impact on Kansas City families and loved ones. She strongly advocated for the establishment of a cold case unit within the Kansas City Police Department. Following the meeting with Oakman, Justice for Wyandotte initiated an awareness campaign and petitioned for the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit, aiming to address the numerous unsolved cases that had occurred in Kansas City since 1965. In 2003, police received a DNA match from the condom found near Christina's body, identifying Gary Davis as the suspect. Surprisingly, he was not immediately questioned, despite being closely monitored by Wyandotte County Community Corrections. Gary Davis, a 52-year-old Kansas City resident, was a truck driver in his early 20s at the time of the alleged incidents involving Christina and Pearl. Due to the nature of his job, it was understandable why he had managed to evade suspicion back then, as he often traveled far from the crime scenes. Although the police were aware of his whereabouts, it took 20 years to finally arrest Davis. The investigation was slow, with a 14-month delay in questioning the suspect, followed by years of silence. After a public appeal for justice for Wyandotte in 2021, it took another 18 months to process the DNA, form a team, and apprehend the perpetrator. In 2022, the cold case unit connected the dots, confirming that the DNA from both crime scenes matched Gary Davis Sr., the initial suspect. Police also discovered a Facebook page that matched Davis's name and description, containing controversial posts about truck driving and societal double standards. When attempting to contact him, officers found only one operational phone number out of 3 listed, with a full voicemail inbox. Finally, in September 2023, Davis was arrested and charged with the murder of Christina King, with bail set at $500,000. Importantly, there was no statute of limitations, ensuring that justice could be served regardless of the time that had passed. If convicted, Davis could face life imprisonment. In a surprising turn of events, Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree and Kansas City Police Chief Carl Oakman jointly conducted a press conference to commend their investigative efforts. Dupree highlighted the relentless work of the detectives, while Oakman underscored the importance of a thorough investigation over the significance of the DNA hit. They both emphasized the meticulous analysis required to ensure the correct suspect was apprehended. Meanwhile, in March 2022, Attorney Cheryl Pellet, representing Kansas City, shed light on the corrupt environment within the Kansas Police Department. She issued a statement aiming to indict not only disgraced detective Roger Golubski, but the entire culture that enabled his misconduct. Golubski, responsible for an unjust arrest, faced federal charges, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Presently, the Kansas Police Department is collaborating with other law enforcement agencies to determine if Davis could be linked to additional homicides in the region or potentially thousands of miles away due to his occupation as a long-haul driver. Davis is currently a suspect or person of interest in at least 8 other cases. The establishment of the cold case unit through Justice for Wyandotte led to the resolution of 11 more cases. It is evident that the Kansas Police Department bears responsibility for the delayed arrest, which could have been made years earlier. The department owes the families of the victims an apology and a thorough explanation. The distressed loved ones, particularly Christina's daughters, who sought closure for years, were all victims of the department's incompetence.